Greetings, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and this video is about Nazi Germany from 1918 to 45 for History A-level. So bear in mind, why does it begin in 1918? We're looking at Germany just after the end of the First World War, right up until the end of the Second World War. So you may know there were significant territorial losses for Germany as a result of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, losing Pomerania and Silesia, because Poland came back into being after a century, losing Posen, became part of Poland, some of East Prussia likewise, Memel to Lithuania. Danzig was to become a city under the League of Nations protection, effectively controlled by Poland. It's now called Gdansk. North Schleswig-Holstein became part of Denmark. Alsace-Lorraine reverted to France, which had been part of until 1870. Eupen and Malmedy went to Belgium, and so on. Okay, so what are some of the key issues? How strong was Weimar Germany? Why did it fall? Why was the National Socialist Party so weak in the 1920s? And then why did it suddenly come to office? How did the Nazis maintain their power up until 1939? How successful were the National Socialist economic policies right up to the end of the era? We'll look at the impact of the Treaty of Versailles, the instability of the Weimar Republic, its economic headaches, Weimar's halcyon days of the late 1920s, and the ultimate decline and collapse of the Weimar system. We will look at the prehistory of the Nazi Party, their evolving strategy, their Beerholt Putsch, their fluctuating electoral fortunes up until 1933, state terror under National Socialism, persecution of dissidents and ethnic minorities, methods of propaganda and indoctrination, the economic development of the country under the National Socialist dictatorship, the role of Dr. Hjalmar Schacht in the mid-1930s, the new plan, the 1936 four-year plan, the preparation for total war. Anyway, so in November 1918, the First World War came to an end. Germany was obliged to parley. It had been defeated, but many Germans didn't accept that. Well, certainly army officers didn't, because national pride was often at the core of their identity. There was that 19th century saying that most countries have an army, but Prussia is an army with the country. Now that could be applied to the rest of Germany. In case you don't know, Prussia is the area around Berlin. Germany had been united in 1870 and Prussia was the core of it. Prussia was to Germany what England is to the United Kingdom, but I digress. So some of the most nationalistic Germans believed that cowardly, grasping, greedy, power-hungry, left-wing politicians, especially Jewish ones, had sued for peace just because they wanted to win office and they were actively anti-patriotic and so on. Again, that's largely a myth. So it is true that it was mostly liberal and left-wing politicians who sued for peace, and a few of them were Jewish, but there's this racist trope which claims that Jewish people were behind this, or that left-wingers were anti-patriotic and things like that. As electoral statistics will later bear out, a high majority of Germans believed it was right to make peace in 1918 because the military situation was utterly hopeless. General Ludendorff had told the Kaiser, that's the Emperor of Germany, that the war was utterly unwinnable in October 1918, and the only thing to do was to seek peace, whilst there was still some chance of preserving the social order. What really weighed heavily on the minds of establishment figures in Germany in 1918 was the Russian Revolution of October the previous year. And in July 1918, the Tsar, that's the Emperor of Russia, and his family, had been shot dead. The next month, August 1918, had been announced. That's only 3 months before the armistice. So the Kaiser and various other royal families and Grand Ducal families in Germany were very aware of their fate and didn't want that to happen there. As we're going to see, there were mutinies in the army, people running up the red flag. Some people were saying there should be a communist revolution in Germany. So the German upper classes were petrified and wanted to end the war before the war ended them. Anyway, General Ludendorff later came up with a stab-in-the-back theory. He was actually speaking to a British general right after the war, and the British general suggested, so you mean you've been stabbed in the back? And Ludendorff liked that one, and he disseminated it widely. He was most eager to exonerate himself for blame, So as a bad officer, he did not take responsibility, and he was at pains to spread the theory that they were defeated by the home front by treason, the enemy within. So the national mood was one of rancour, and there was a grave sense of humiliation. So 11th of November 1918, the guns fell silent at 11 o'clock in the morning. As we know, the Kaiser had abdicated, that's renounced the crown for himself and his heirs and successors. He'd appointed a socialist chancellor, Friedrich Ebert, only 2 days before, and the Kaiser fled to the Netherlands, which had been neutral in the war. So in January 1919, there was an attempted revolution by Spartacists, who were later to rename themselves communists. They took the name because of Spartacus, the Thracian slave who led a slave revolt in ancient Rome. The idea being that working class were effectively slaves. Yes, they got wages, but they were wage slaves and terribly exploited, prisoners of starvation, as the communist song The Internationale put it. The leaders of the Spartacus were Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. Both of them had opposed the First World War. Indeed, in 1914, the Reichstag, that's the German parliament, had not had a chance to vote in the war. They're allowed to vote on war credits, whether the government should borrow money to fund the war. That's as close as they came to a vote on the war. For over 400 people in the Reichstag, Liebknecht was the only one who voted against. And he and Rosa Luxemburg spent much of the war in prison for anti-war agitation. Anyway, it was defeated, the Spartacus uprising. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were killed. This organisation called the Freikorps was founded as in Free Corps. They were right-wing ex-soldiers. They were reviving a name which had been around about 100 years before of people without actual military training who'd volunteered to fight the French. Anyway, Rosa Luxemburg was Jewish, not particularly religious, but quite a few right-wingers in Germany at the time were anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism was a disease that was found throughout much of the Western world at the time, and so some bigots claimed that she was a communist because she was Jewish, or communism was a Jewish conspiracy, and dribbled like that. General Groener became the first commander of the army under the Weimar Republic, and he said that Jews are the wire pullers of international revolution, the image being of that of marionettes, as in the Jewish people are behind a curtain and they're pulling wires to make the puppets of other communist leaders move. Anyway, so Germany became a republic, a country without a monarchy. And we're going to see there was a bit of a gap in the psyche of Germans who are used to having some titanic figure govern them, a warlord to admire. Germany from 1918 to 1933 is known as the Weimar Republic. That's because the government had to flee Berlin, the capital, and move to Weimar only for about a month in 1919 because of the high level of political violence. And in Weimar, they thrashed out the constitution of Germany. The proper name of the country would be the German Republic, not just Germany. But this era in Germany is known as the Weimar Republic. So I used to get this in essays. One of the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic is its capital was not Berlin, but Weimar. It was only in Weimar for a month, and then they returned to Berlin. Anyway, so Friedrich Ebert, who was chancellor, then became president because he's head of state of a republic. There was no monarch anymore, and the chancellor became Philipp Scheidemann, also a socialist. One of the first decisions that the Socialist Government took was that women would be allowed to vote for the first time. All votes had equal value. There was voting on the basis of proportional representation. This is the most democratic system. The trouble is it made for lots of weak coalitions. No one party was able to command a majority in the Reichstag. They had to cobble together coalitions of a few political parties sharing power to form a stable government. Anyway, so there were lots of inexperienced voters who hadn't had the right to vote before. The voting age had been 25 under the Kaiser. It was lowered to 18 at this time. So there were a lot of wild and radical voters. It wasn't just the socialists who wanted the armistice or form the coalition. The Centre Party did as well. That was a party for the Catholic minority, Catholics being about 33% of the German population. The DDP, that's the German Democratic Party, and so on. And some of the more reasonable right-wingers also recognised that the game was up. The only sensible thing to do was to make peace, because the war had been lost. 2 million German soldiers had been killed. There was no prospect of victory in sight. In fact, Germany's been pushed back on all fronts. Germany's allies, like Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary, had all abandoned the fight. But I shouldn't go too far back into history. So the end of the war saw horrendous misfortune for Germany. Hundreds of thousands of civilians had perished owing to malnutrition. There was grave privation throughout the country for the lack of winter fuel, as in coal and wood. Remember, people didn't have central heating in those days. Not many people had electricity. So there was great anguish, but some people were hopeful for the future.